Hello, and welcome to the So Emotional podcast. Here on the cast, we discuss everything emotions through the lens of attachment, the nervous system, and internal parts work. We're a little irreverent and like to have fun exploring the emotional issues and dynamics that interest us. So come along and hang out. Let's explore the fascinating lands of emotions.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the So Emotional podcast. I'm your host, Angela Wetzel. I'm a certified relationship and life coach. And this is also your host, Nick Carl. He's an experienced somatic experiencer
That's right.
with 4 years under his belt. He's done a lot of feeling in his life. That's okay.
Yes, I have. So today, we mined up a few questions. The one we're going to tackle first, or just talk about first, because something that's been coming up for you, Angela, is this idea of wait, what is coaching? What is coaching? So, what do you
Oh,
think?
well, I don't know that we were going to talk about that first necessarily or just shore up the questions, but um, maybe we
Well,
should
it
have
was at the
talked about that
top.
more.
It was at the top, so that's why I started with it.
Oh, okay. Um, Actually, what I did, I sort of wanted to talk about first was just kind of this mood that I've been in today.
Okay.
Uh,
Talk
I,
about your mood.
yeah, like I would say today I've been feeling very like crunchy and
Mm-hmm.
cranky, and also um, I've noticed that just where I'm at, like in life, you may have also noticed this, Nick, but like this idea of like new level, new devil.
Mm.
So as we grow and expand, and as we embark on this emotional journey and we go deeper, it's like our level of attunement and awareness can increase. And also our ability to well, with that, our ability to feel things can increase. And that can also mean that sometimes we're feeling things more intensely than we
Mm.
felt, or that there are now new things that like feel safe to like come up. And
Mm-hmm.
I decided to step way outside of my comfort zone in a few areas this past month. Like I hired a new coach. I went on a trip and did this 3-day music festival. I've never done one before, with a whole group of like new friends that I've really only known for a month. And there's just lots and lots and lots of new things. And I realized like doing new stuff when we don't feel safe can cause our nervous systems to go into a state of dysregulation. And what I have noticed is that the most important thing is being able to find ourselves in the middle of the chaos, in the middle of the storm again and again and again. Because having ourselves, like having our own back and doing that kind of self regulation is super important. And of course, like being able to reach out and connect with people, um, like me calling you or me talking to my friend Alexis or whatever, co-regulating, calming my nervous system by connecting with people, is also really important. And anyway, I've just been sort of thinking about those things because today I felt, I noticed even through all the work I've done and attachment stuff, and my own style was very much fearful avoidant. For anyone who doesn't know, it's really just a combination of anxious and avoidant with an element of fear added. And that element of fear and fearful avoidant can really come from a lot of different places. But it can be if there was actual physical abuse or psychological intimidation, anytime you felt fear or afraid of one of your caretakers. And I think that could even be like if you had a parent that maybe like threatened harm for you or like threatened harm on themselves in some way. If they were scary or chaotic or unpredictable, that can cause that additional layer or level of fear and attachment. So having done a lot of therapy and coaching myself over the years and healing a ton, I still notice at times that I will still have approach anxiety, which those who have avoidant aspects will have approach anxiety. And that means you can start to feel anxious or overwhelmed when you have people moving towards you, or you have circumstances where you feel overwhelmed, or like you're going to fail, or, it can kind of be like a shame spiral of just feeling like too much is happening and you can't control it. And then on the other side, I still have abandonment anxiety that can come up where it's me being afraid of being left, or perhaps certain things in my life leaving and not coming back. And that can kind of include anything from like relationships to something at work to, strangely enough, like your favorite mug or your fuzzy blanket, like losing something. It could be like relationship to money. It can be any of those things. So I've been navigating a lot of my abandonment anxiety lately, which is interesting. And it's less to do with like romantic relationship and more to do with, um, I don't know, just it just interpersonal relationships, period. And also some business things. So I've just been noticing that. And I wanted to presence the fact that like on this journey, um, it's you just keep learning shit. And no matter what you do, it's like you never get it done. Like you're never going to heal everything. And it's starting to just get more comfortable with the fact that there's going to be discomfort. And when we can learn to show up for ourselves and be okay with like not being okay and not like pushing the feelings away, then I think that can really change a lot. Like I think that changes our relationship to ourselves a lot. So that was kind of, yeah, something I wanted to say.
Well, I think that there is a connection into the idea of what is coaching, right?
Yeah.
And that is sort of like you said, there isn't. It's not a binary thing, right? Yes, you can have enough going on in your being and in your energy and in your emotions and in your thoughts to be um, like stunted, like wrapped up, like hard to get things done, right? And that like that can be that can be at different levels, right? I know that within the last 5 years, right, before I started getting some, before I started working in earnest with other people on my own being and on my own emotions and stuff, that I was really struggling with sleeping. My nervous system was so out of whack. Like I was really very like tied very tightly, right?
Hmm.
And I think I made some major inroads, which then it did free me up absolutely and changed my trajectory and gave me a different set of problems, right? And
Oh
so,
yeah.
right. And so, what did you say? Bigger something, bigger something. What is it?
New level, new devil.
New level, new devil. Okay. So,
Yeah.
I see in my mind like a distinct, like, uh, introduction into the depths of my own emotional body and my own emotional being and
Hmm.
the way that some of those things and some of those deeply held beliefs played out in my life. And
Hmm.
whereas previously I kind of dealt with them on in some kind of fashion, but some disconnected. So there was a connection made, and then and then and then I had to begin to ride a different ride at the amusement park of my life, and at, it still is quite harrowing, right? Like I think that these are a better set of problems, absolutely, right?
Right.
But it is still quite harrowing. So it's like, okay, I did a bunch of fantastic work, but still, uh, uh, there is a wonderful amount of things that I can get more comfortable with, right? So that's one of the
Right.
things that like I think about all the time now. So I've been like walking a lot on the track, and one of the things that I try to do is soften myself and be okay with whatever is in my being. And sometimes it's a little, mushy or dark, or there's things coming through. So like just like soften and like be okay with whatever comes through in each moment. Just like
Mhm.
relax my being, relax my body, be with what is here, you know,
Mhm.
because my inclination and my practice has always been to be like, I'm like fighting things off, like, no, 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 no. You're like turning away constantly from the moment, right?
Mhm.
And rejecting so many things in so many different ways. Um, that acceptance of those moments is like, I think that's where the work is. And I think that that journey of acceptance and how deeply you can go into that and of accepting your life and accepting what is given you is maybe never ending. Like they talk about, super yogis who would just like let it all go. And I don't imagine, maybe I am one of those, but whatever. But I can almost like feel the trajectory.
Mhm.
And so in that, on that sort of like spectrum from being very tied up, being very rejective, fighting everything, and being in a real battle that um, took me down, right, and really affected my life and made things really hard to do. Um, at some point, like I was pretty exacerbated and was encouraged by some people to reach out, and so I started doing research, and I got myself connected with actually a therapist. It was coaching because it was across state lines, right? Coaching. He
Oh,
is a
okay.
he is a therapist. Um,
Mhm.
and we did the somatic work, like essentially. To me, it feels like pretty basic 101 stuff of entering your body and experiencing what is there, and then having safety with somebody else through attunement and connection. And it's just a practice of entering the body and being with what is there. And
Mhm.
so I don't know. The line between coaching and therapy, I think, is a little fuzzy, right?
I do
Because,
too.
right, because um,
Mhm.
I watched this really great YouTube video this week of a therapist, and he was trying to get into the nuts and bolts of the basics of like, okay, he counted 370 different modalities, cognitive behavioral therapy, like he ran down a giant list. He
Mhm.
himself was schooled and practiced in somatic work and attachment work, the work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. And he
Mhm.
thought that some of the basic 101 structure of how a therapeutic relationship works is like safe space, right? Safe space. Well, that happens in coaching too. There's
Mhm.
like he talked about like a 3 level listening, which is like as a therapist, he like listens and accepts his client's message, and what they're communicating. He also listens inside of himself for his own transferences and how it interacts with his own emotional body. And then he's listening and being perceptive to how his words interact with the emotional body and somatics of the person that he's talking to, right? And trying to balance this and being aware of that is a really fundamental and generative human thing, right? And so both of those happen in coaching, and both of those things happen in therapy, which was his argument that that's like the basics of how it actually can help people.
Mhm. Mhm.
What are some of the other like kind of distinctive differences that you think about?
Well, basically, like what I was trained on, I went to IPEC, which is the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching, and their definition of the difference between coaching and therapy is that therapy is really taking someone from a non-functional state, like they're not doing very well, like barely surviving,
Like can't get
and
out of
and
bed.
like can't get out of bed, or they're having like crippling anxiety. A lot of it is like mental health and being able to diagnose some perhaps like disorders.
Right.
Um, although if you get into like the trauma informed field, a lot of there's a lot of like dissenting opinions as to like what disorders are, and like are disorders actually like the body in perfect order responding to environment, responding to things. So it's,
Mm-hmm.
there's different like schools of thought even within like different therapeutic models. Like it just depends on the the system, right? Because there's the DSM, like the manual to for diagnosing like all of the different psychiatric disorders.
Right.
Um, and then anyway, well, that's a whole thing. Get into it, but um, basically, it's like that school of thought can be on illness or disorder or like mental health issues, as opposed to looking at the entire system to say, what if this person or this um, their psychology isn't misbehaving? Like, what if it's actually in perfect working order? But to go back to the definition thing, it would be more like therapy is to take someone from not functioning so well into a functional state, being able to
Mm-hmm.
work and like sleep well and just, like basically live their life, right?
Yeah, have some sort of baseline of
Yeah.
of functionality, like to
Yes,
get up and like
functioning.
live your
Yeah.
life, right?
Right. Like being an adult to some degree, like being able to be a contributing member of society, right?
Okay.
And then coaching is really meant to take someone from functional into thriving. So that means like areas of your life where you feel stuck, it's like can be more about functional goals and like moving towards like specific end goals. And it's also not to say you can't do that in therapy too, to some degree. And now there's a lot of like training crossover.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of therapists that become coaches because it's just gosh, it's like, how do I even get into this whole thing and explain? Um, there I think differences in how emotions and like energy are approached if you look at the different models. But again, it just depends. Like there's just so many different modalities, like you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned. Um, yeah, so I mean, I would say like coaches are not trained therapists. We are not trained to diagnose mental health disorders. But what I've been trained to do, and it is an important aspect of training, is to understand when someone is coachable and when someone is not coachable.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone isn't coachable and they come, it's our job to help refer them back to therapy or refer
Mm-hmm.
them to therapy, because you can have people that don't necessarily need to go to therapy. They may have like a decent basis of functionality in order to do coaching and get great results from it.
Right.
But other times there are people like maybe they have done therapy but they need more therapy, and it's not like a comment on them being good or bad or whatever. It's like never a judgment on that. It's just like and I'm trying to think about like how to define like coachability, but it's the ability for someone to essentially be able to shift, like I guess be able to observe their own behavior, observe their own emotion,
Mm-hmm.
um, to such a degree where there's at least some level of duality, meaning that they're able to witness themselves with enough space that they're able to actually um, move into their prefrontal cortex, so their seat of higher
Mm-hmm.
awareness, so that they're actually able to take some control and then make a mental shift and create a new behavior.
Yeah.
And when I'm working with someone, or I have and I really have only referred one client back to therapy, and it was simply because um, what started happening is there was a shift into victimization where in her opinion, like I was victimizing her and causing her to feel certain emotions that she was like, you essentially it was like, you made me do this and then you made me feel this way because of this. And so I to me that's recognition that there's lack of understanding of boundaries, lack of understanding of self-sovereignty and personal authority,
Mm-hmm.
and not understanding how emotions, like where they're generated and how that works.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up referring that client back into therapy. And it is normal, I think, for people to feel some sense of like maybe being insulted by that, or even if you like tell a friend or somebody like, I think you need therapy, like people can take that as like an insult. But I never ever view it that way. It's just, I view it as that aspect of the nervous system just needing more support when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to having those emotions being heard and held and witnessed. Because without that, there's no way that we can create the space needed to actually have, like, I guess, that sense of calm, or to identify the difference between us and our emotions,
Mm-hmm.
or to be able to identify the fact that we can have boundaries or any of those things, right? So I believe there are a lot of foundational things that need to be put into place via therapy or via secure relationships, to some
Mm-hmm.
degree, healthy modeling or whatever. Because I can tell you, when I first went into therapy, I was not a good candidate for coaching. It took me several years before I was able to be get into coaching. And when I had my first coach, within 6 months, I realized that it wasn't the right coach for me. And I was able to understand the difference between healthy relationship dynamics within coaching and healthy relationship dynamics within therapy, so that I was able to request another IPEC coach. Because and not to like brag on my coaching program, but it was excellent. It really was. Um, and really helped me understand a lot of those differences, like the difference between anabolic and catabolic energy. So energy that's generative is anabolic. It's creative, it's generative, it's cooperative, it's like good good feeling good feeling energy. And then energy that's catabolic, it's more destructive, it's breaking down.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, what I realized they were teaching in IPEC, and actually the reason the reason why I didn't necessarily want to become a coach is that I was already heavily into psychology and emotional work, and even like spiritual stuff. And I really thought that coaching was going to ignore this whole aspect of like spirituality that I had really gotten into. And what I learned was that coaching was so much more about energy and emotional energy, like really about understanding like how to climb the emotional ladder
Mm-hmm.
and like feel into energy and understand intuition and things without maybe directly saying that.
Right.
Um, so I was very pleasantly surprised to see that they were basically talking about Dr. David Hawkins' scale of human consciousness, or even like polyvagal theory, how that even ties into it. And
Mm-hmm.
like, if you look at Abraham Hicks, like that emotional vibrational scale or the Hertz scale, which are all the same things. They're just like emotional ladders
Mm-hmm.
and based on emotional vibrations. Because Dr. Bruce Schneider, he's the guy that created IPEC or founded IPEC. He has something that he calls the 7 energy levels. And it's really the same thing. So it was very cool to see that what he created, or what basically what he was explaining, tied in so well to all these other emotional or energetic ladders that already existed.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, like coaching, the foundation of coaching is really being able to understand and interpret energy, which sounds maybe a little far out there, kind of like woo woo. But if you study like heart math, or um, what, like quantum physics and things like that, then you understand that everything is energy. Like our hearts do have certain like waves and patterns, and depending on whether we're in coherence or not, there's just different, and even the brain, there's like alpha and beta and gamma, delta waves and things like that. So depending on what different frequencies we've got going on, even emotionally, there's different vibrational resonance for all those emotions.
Well, I can think about my own emotional, we'll say, resonance when I needed therapy, And so down the scale of just mostly it's just shame things, which is at the bottom of the scale, uh,
Mm-hmm.
are so, those types of energy in my being are so powerful, right? That it's really like twisting me into a pretzel. And so one of the things you talked about in coaching is about the ability to have perspective. And if your internal, so we talk about, like part stuff too, if you, so, like for me, I didn't, I thought that I was sort of through all the, the big waves of bullshit in my own life, and it kind of creeped up on me until it started really bending me out of shape, right? Um, in those very hot and very low on the energetic scale times, it is, if I sort of like go to a coach, or even some of the ideas, because like I've read and seen like so many things. Like for a while I felt like old Charlie Brown, because I would like pick a new program or something and like try to do a thing, and it was just like, nope. It's just like, tee up the ball, here's the thing that I got to do, and just like no follow through. That's just because I was like, these other things that I haven't dealt with, that I didn't really have the tools or the know-how or the guidance to deal with, were dragging me down, right? And so I think probably for most of my life I was not a good candidate for coaching, because I had these really strong energetic pieces, emotional pieces that I was divorced from, that were essentially ruling my life, right? And so I sort of see that, as like consciousness is like this little ball. And for me, it was stuck in this mire, right? And my life started to get really like, and it affected all aspects of my life, absolutely and for sure. But then on a longer timeline, when my ability to maintain that system started to fall apart, those that system of keeping all that energy down, like like not recognized, not expressed, and not taken care of, when keeping the beach ball under the water started to fail, I really started to struggle in just everyday life. Like I was having a hard time of it, just like getting out of bed and going to work. Like shit was like paper
Mm.
thin sometimes. For me, it was like anger. Most of it was anger. Like I was just exploding all the time, and it was bleeding out into lots of places in my life. Um, but like I think about myself now, so it's like, okay, well, I've made some inroads.
Mm-hmm.
I've I don't know if I've healed stuff. Has my vibrational awareness changed? Somewhat, not completely. I still, deal with that kind of stuff all the time. Like you talked about your
Mm-hmm.
avoidance, and then you're worrying about being uh, abandoned, or approach anxiety, and then being abandoned. It felt a little bit like a sandwich. It's like it's like
Yeah, it
here,
is.
here,
Just
but I'm gonna lose things too. And it's like it feels
right.
like a little bit of like, and I imagine if both those
Yeah.
things start pressing in on you, it's like, that little bit of you that's you inside might get a little squeamish. Might get a
Yeah,
little.
it definitely like I guess through all the therapy and work that I've done, it's like, and so I was talking to a friend earlier briefly, and I had said I feel a bit overwhelmed, and I'm feeling exhausted, and like I forget the other word I used, but it might have been like chaotic or frazzled or something. And then I said, but it's okay, I'm fine. And
Mm,
she said, those two things don't go together. That doesn't make sense. And I said, it does, because I'm comfortable in the overwhelm. Like I know I trust in my own resilience. I trust in my ability to be able to handle it. I trust in my ability to reach out and get support when I need,
Mm-hmm.
so that there is a state of like mastery and comfort in the discomfort. And I think if I didn't have that, I would not be coaching other humans. Like
Well,
I would,
I think that that's one of the wider perspectives that starts to bud, right? And that is there's that implicit lie in some of those things that, especially when we'll say these types of spiciness come up, they come up from the depths, right, from the deep past,
mm-hmm,
and the implicit part is it's always going to be this way, or the world was always this way, right?
mm-hmm,
So the limited view you're seeing now is this is really the truth, which is like a little sneaky whisper that comes in, you know? And so even in, say, the past year when it's gotten really spicy,
mm-hmm,
I know that all I have to do is just wait a little while, you know?
mm-hmm.
And inevitably, like, and I've started to like develop a faith in that, you know? And I think that if I could continue to grow that, maybe I could start meeting those times when it gets really spicy and I'm starting to feel a lot of pressure about the type of compassion that I can have for myself there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of just like, like, hey, bud, yeah, sometimes things are tough. Yeah. Instead of using that energy and using that moment and then seeing 1,000 years, that things can never change, or only seeing it from that perspective,
Right.
which is scary. But I think that is a wider perspective that begins to sort of be seeded into even the times now, maybe when it gets a little rough, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I think when we become more masterful at this, we can go in and out of identification
Mm,
with those parts and personalities that are like, this is utter shit. Like, it's never going to get any better. It's always going to be like this.
mm-hmm.
Nothing new is happening. What you want isn't possible. Like,
Right.
all the very bad feelings, right?
Yeah.
And then on the other side of it, it's like, to me, it feels like going in and out, like being in identification and then pulling back and knowing that, like being able to observe it and hold it, and then sometimes being in it, both. Like, but it's not ever fully identified, and maybe not in a place yet, especially with the stickier items, the stickier, heavier things that come up. Um, and I don't know, it's just really interesting to feel how much emotion and power is there. Like,
Mm,
I don't mean like, it doesn't feel like it's powerful over me. Like, I don't feel victimized by it. I think like I used to. Like, I definitely felt victimized by emotions for a long time.
mm-hmm.
But now it's more like, um, reframing like how I feel about emotions. And I think this is really important. Just, and this is a common thing when I do consults, or I hear a lot, from people that have experienced a lot of trauma or that are highly sensitive, and they'll say like, I hate my emotions. I'm so tired of feeling. I'm so
Mm-hmm.
over it. Because I think what can happen is we can have an awakening to a certain level where then suddenly we are aware and we're feeling. We're no longer numbing. We're no longer dissociating. We're no longer distracting, and suddenly it's like all this emotion's there and we do not have the skill set to know what to fucking do with it,
Right.
but it's here, right? And then it can create this like adversarial relationship where the emotion is the enemy. It's here to like sabotage it. It's a thief. It's just here to like be a pain in the ass. Why is this here? I don't want it. I don't like it. And that can be introjection or ways that we have learned to treat ourselves by how our parents treated our emotions. So
Mm-hmm.
when we were needy or crying or throwing a tantrum or whatever, it was like, ugh, go away, or just go get out of here, or whatever that was, right?
Right.
And we do the same thing to ourselves, the same thing to our emotions when they show up. But it's like, what if we're able to put emotions in their rightful place and recognize them as messengers and welcome them as guests, welcome them as friends and lovers and mentors and experts and just important, um, I don't know, holy messengers, right? Like,
Right.
because if you have your hand on the stove and if all of your nerve endings have completely like atrophied or died and you don't have the nerve endings, you're burning your hand. So it's like, do we really not want to feel pain? No, we do. It's necessary. It teaches us our limits. It's giving us information about how to keep ourselves safe and giving us information about who we are, where we are in time, and all these different things. And so emotional pain is really not very different. And I think the difference is we can choose the pain and really allow those emotions to be there and speak to them like, like, hey, sweetheart, like, I feel you, or hey, like, thank you for coming. Thank you for letting me know. I feel you. I hear you. I'm listening. Um, and and welcoming the pain of that, to know that there's transformation happening and that there's things that we're creating because we're allowing ourselves to be impacted and influenced by the information, as opposed to suffering, which is pushing it away and saying, I do not want this reality, whatever this is. It's like, what these emotions that are happening now, like, I don't want to feel this way. And when we are in resistance to emotions and they become an enemy, or maybe they become a perpetrator and like we're the victim and they're assaulting us and harming us, right? Then it's just interesting how the relationship to our own emotions can really dictate whether we experience pain and we move through it, or we are existing in this place of suffering, like the seventh circle of hell, and this like groundhog's day of just never ending shit, because we are resisting like the very information that we need in order to um, make sense of our world, make sense of life, make sense of our values and what life means to us and all these things. And so it just but it makes sense to me why like there can be a very painful relationship to emotions based on um, the covert and overt emotional abuse that
Mm-hmm.
happens throughout our lives.
Yeah. So I absolutely agree, and I think that that relationship, right, your relationship to your own emotions is, I don't know why, but it feels like so kind of like almost hidden, you know? So do you do coaching around that particular interaction, how people
Yeah.
experience? Because I know now that it is like, it's like a practice thing. It's like a thing you have to like practice. And once you begin to do it, it's
Mhm.
like, oh, okay. Like that,
Right.
my patterns of interacting with my own emotions were just set, and like, and I never even like second guess them, you know? That's another sort of like wider perspective. Like, absolutely. It's
Mhm.
tricky because of the different, we'll say, speeds and intensities of emotions, how they come and how quickly they can do their thing. You know that like
Mm.
so I know that I have plenty of more work to do to be loving and accepting of my own emotions when they do come. Right? Because I still have
Yeah.
situations I get myself into where things get rejected like out of hand. You know.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I also think that when, so I think we've talked about this a little bit in, I think, one of our past podcasts, where emotions can become triggers. So
Right.
when when an emotion becomes tied to a moment of trauma, then when that emotion arises, it's going to solidly like pull us back into that past or into resistance or trying to avoid the pain of the like neuroception, what our nervous system anticipates is going to happen because that emotion is present.
Right.
So there's lots of like sticky kind of things
So do you think if somebody says,
at play.
I'm sick of feeling whatever it
Mhm.
is that situation? Like they've developed a trigger to their own shit?
Yeah, like, I mean, likely
Yeah.
they're feeling triggered by their own emotions or they're feeling victimized because, and I don't know if I ever ended up finishing saying what I was saying, but um, I think what has been happening to a lot of people just in the past couple of years, because with everything being shut down and there being so many more I don't it just like feels like all hell is broken loose like when it just comes to all of these different things that are happening, right?
Yeah.
Just so much chaos and turmoil in the world, right? And it's like everything is sort of blowing up, right? And it's kind of wild. People have had less and less places to run to and distract and numb. Like it's almost become impossible to avoid. And then if you're steadily watching the news or, I mean, whatever is happening, because there's just been so much change in such a short period of time, I think a lot of people have been thrust into awakening, meaning that it's almost like a crack in the shell or the veneer of like numbness or dissociation. And suddenly it's so much that they can't ignore it
Mm-hmm.
anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they can't drink it away or they can't or they're like people have been sort of stuck in their homes like with their spouses and when they could usually just leave and find something better to do and be like they're getting on my nerves, like now they're like facing it and it's like right in their face and they can't
Right.
get away from it. So I think that and yes, we can experience awakening like through inspiration, of course, but I just think it's human nature that we're more likely to awaken through like serious suffering,
Yeah.
like Eckhart Tolle talks about his story of like immense suffering, like sitting on the bench. And I forget what everything that had happened that was so awful, but he just talks about like his ego kind of cracking open. And he
Yeah.
was just like in this blissful state for like how long. And like Byron Katie, who talks about just like the immense amount of pain and suffering she went through. And then like she was lying on the floor, maybe upstairs somewhere in this like in her bedroom or something, and also the same thing happening.
Mm-hmm.
And in those cases it's like their egos had been like totally cracked open, like there was just not like nothing left to really kind of to like they couldn't resist any longer, like they just couldn't hold it together. But I think for a lot of people it like there's cracks and then it can get bigger and bigger and then it's like awakening over time. But unfortunately, because of all the stuff that's been happening, I think it's harder and harder for people to stay asleep and to ignore that things are shifting and there's crazy shit happening.
Right.
But also awakening and not having the emotional skill sets or tools to manage and be with those emotions and know how to just hold them or discern, like to understand how to be an emotional surfer. That is a huge recipe for suffering, because how you were related to as a child, how your emotions were related to as a child, you will relate to them the same way,
Right.
because if you don't have the modeling,
Right.
and that is just a recipe for more and more suffering. And so when you're finally feeling so much or you have grief and sadness and anger and frustration and terror and all of these things coming up at the same time, like it's really 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 difficult to like hold it together and be able to hold space for that. And
Mm-hmm.
even someone who has a decent mastery of those emotions, like that can still be a really tough time too,
Mm-hmm.
experiencing grief, experiencing major loss of something that was safe and familiar and secure
Right.
or whatever. So it's like it's really tough goings, but it is possible to learn the tools and the skill sets to be able to not just learn how to self-soothe, but to also reach out and get the support. But when that first happens, like I will testify right now because I remember being more awake without having those tools, and it's fucking awful. It's like the worst to be able to feel everything but not know what to do with it or how to
Mm.
handle it. Like I honestly don't wish that shit on anybody.
Yeah. What about the idea of people reaching out for coaching who don't think they can be helped?
Well, I think it's really normal when we haven't experienced that like new paradigm. So if we're living in a paradigm of I'm a victim, I can't have what I want, life is shit, whatever that like world or whatever that story is, oftentimes living in that world or in that story means that we've created something entirely opposite that's what we really want. So usually what we value, what we desire comes from lack of something or comes from experiencing deep pain around something, and we create something new. Like if we know deeply what it feels like to be abandoned, then we're already in our minds like creating the opposite of that. What I really value, what I really desire is connection
Mm-hmm.
and security and steadfastness and consistency. um, but unfortunately, when that's unfamiliar to the nervous system or that thing has never been modeled before, ever experienced before, it's really hard to believe that it's possible, especially if we've never seen it and we don't know what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I can even say this for myself. Like, I consistently have my own coach that I work with. I work with different coaches on different things from time to time. And like, I have my own stuff where I'm creating new things that I've never experienced before, that people in my family have never experienced before. Like, I'm doing new things
Mm.
that no one in my immediate family or even extended family has done.
Right.
And so, it takes a lot for me to say, this is what I want. I have no idea how it's possible, but I want it and I want to keep focusing and doing this. And I have again and again hit goals and reach things that I wanted to reach that I truly didn't think were possible. And I don't think they would have been if I didn't have the support and the container for it. And I've seen my own clients reach relationship goals and reach goals like just in their life, just to say, like, I love my life. Like, I can literally say I love my life. I can literally say I'm experiencing more happiness and more joy than I ever thought was possible.
Mm-hmm.
But when they first come, they're like, I'm hoping that this is possible. I really don't believe it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
And it just depends on where they're coming from. Like, I had one client in particular who had a young child and um, was was sure that no one would want to date her or be with her because she had a young child.
Mm-hmm.
And then she met someone and he kept stepping up. And at first he was like, well, I'm not sure if I want to raise another kid. Like, I don't know. But we were doing the work to like not focus on that, working on her allowing more, her appreciating where he did show up, what he wanted to offer, being okay if he did step away or say it wasn't what he wanted, like just not adding like fuel to a non-existent fire, right?
Right. Right.
And he loved being with her so much, he just started stepping up. He just started showing up again and again and again.
Hmm.
And it was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And she was just like, holy shit, like he's decided, like, yes, he wants to. And then um yeah, and her life changed and she had an entirely different experience of partnership than she had had before when she
Right.
was married.
And I think without the
Yeah.
container that you guys were able to forge, right? then kind of all the old patterns weigh in and then start pressing in, probably,
Right.
maybe.
Yeah.
And then you get you end up
Yeah,
getting.
it's like the self-fulfilling prophecy that I see again and again. Like what we focus on either consciously or subconsciously, like we will create
Right.
because we're putting energy there. So when we have parts that are like freaking out and are focusing on abandonment, like you can look at your own life, and I'm sure you've seen it, and I've seen it myself, where I have done things that are actually recreating the circumstances that I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to avoid. Like it's
Yeah.
when you look at it, it's almost like crazy making, being like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Like I've been afraid of abandonment. And yet I did this thing where I'm literally pushing people away so that they will abandon me because it's a younger part that's like, its coping mechanism or its strategy is literally that age where it's just it's like the strategy of a 5-year old.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they don't really have the skill set, and it may have worked in the home or at that younger age, but when you're all grown up in entirely different contexts, when you're on your own
Right. It's.
navigating different relationships, like it just doesn't work the same way. And so
Mm-hmm.
you can, you know and also you've probably seen, I know you've seen this, and I've seen this too, and I think everyone has some experience of like seeing their friend or their parent or their partner devolve into like a 4-year old or a 6-year old or like a teenager. Like
Mm-hmm.
we have all seen these other personality or these younger parts, which is why people are like, you're acting like a child, like stop it. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, they are acting like a child because that's the personality that's
Mm-hmm.
driving the bus at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So those personalities will recreate the thing that they're afraid of, although they're trying to avoid it. They're focused on not doing that. So it's like, um, an example I gave recently was like, it's like if you're in an ice cream shop and you ask your friend, like, what do you want? And they're like, not pistachio. And they're like, well, what do you want? I don't want pistachio. And then it's like they're only looking at pistachio. And then you're like, well, here, do you want like vanilla? And they're like, oh, I hate vanilla too, or whatever. But it's like they're not focused on what they're really wanting. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard to create or get what you want if you're only focused on what you don't want, or if you're like, oh, I don't care, it doesn't matter. So
Right.
when we're not in touch with like our actual desires, or if we're not continually focusing and refocusing and recommitting to what we want to create, then we're naturally going to fall into those subconscious,
Mm-hmm.
unconscious patterns and energies and behaviors. And then of course we get the same. So
Yeah. Tricky, tricky.
it is tricky. It's very tricky.
And you can work on that in coaching?
Yes, you can actually.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's actually a huge thing that I work on. Like, well, I work on with my own coach, is timelines. It's like, what are you creating? If you follow these parts and you follow your fear and you just listen to the bullshit, it's like, what is going to happen? For example, like let's say your fear is like never falling in love and like finding that partner. But what if you think like it's never going to happen? Never going to happen for me. And how that makes you feel is likely garbage, very depressed, very, if this is something you really want and you feel like you can't have it, it's not very motivating. So then that would lead you to like put on your sweatpants, lay in bed, get some Haagen Dazs, like maybe watch When Harry Met Sally on repeat or something, right? Like trying to make yourself feel better. But what you're not doing is anything that's actually getting you out of your house, meeting people. So it's like being very careful about what thoughts, what beliefs, what behaviors we're engaging in. So yeah, coaching does cover a lot of that.
Yeah. I was thinking about that scenario you talked about. Uh, you know,
Mm.
never going to be in some relationship. I was just thinking about in my own brain. Sorry if this is non sequitur.
Mm.
So I don't sit and like eat Haagen Dazs and like bum out about it.
Mhm.
What I think I've started to do is to not trust the desire.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's
There's
which just leaves me in
different.
kind of like it's a little bit of like it feels just like an in between zone, right? So it's like I guess that desire was there for a long time, but now it's like I don't know if I trust because it just seems like it seems very old, right? As in
Right.
that strong desire comes from like a wounded place.
Mhm.
And it's like,
Right.
and it was such like a bleat of just like, oh, I need, where it's just like, oh, no, not necessarily. That's nice. It's a nice thing, but you don't need that. You're okay. You know, we're
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to get into that anyway.
I think that there's a difference between desires that come from our ego and come from our pain
Hmm.
and like deep soul desires that are born of like inspiration and expansion.
Hmm.
And I think it's also important to be able to discern the difference
Hmm.
because when it's sort of like those desires that come from wounded places can be very like addictive,
Yeah.
right? So it's like I need this thing in order to feel better,
Right.
right? So I'm desiring this because I feel like shit, so I'm gonna feel better. And if I get this thing, I'll feel better.
Right.
And that is like a natural, normal thing to do. Um, but it's backwards. It's like you'll get that thing and you're not necessarily gonna, you might feel better temporarily. It might last a second, it might last a
Yeah.
couple days, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee the thing that you think you're gonna get by getting that thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have like a deeper, like soul desire, inspiration to do something, I think it has a different feeling to it. I think
Different resonance.
yeah, it's like I think it's expansive. I
Mm-hmm.
think it can just feel really exciting, and it's almost like not necessarily like tied, like it's almost like wanting something, but it's like not being as attached to that desire because it just feels good
Mm.
to be able to experience like the expansiveness of that thought or that desire.
Mm.
And then it's like it doesn't have to happen or not, but it's almost like it leads you or it guides you as opposed to you trying to grab onto it.
Yeah. I know that like
So I think
in my own bouquet, uh, noticing the difference between those things is something that like I have developed, and not concretely, not like
mhm,
eagle-eyed, but it's like I'm like a bloodhound of sorts. It's like
mhm,
sniffing out things. It's like and I think that's just like part of my own learning process is like, and I'm not trying to like be an asshole to those things. Maybe a little bit, where like when I'm deconstructing it in my own head of just like, oh no, that's old shit. And then when I start to dig into it a little bit, it's like, oh no, that's just those are, yeah, those are old carrot and stick things, right?
mhm,
And it's like, okay, well, what if we set that down and just explore what's going on here, right? And then maybe search for something that has that quality to it, right? Of of like
mhm,
expansiveness, like feeling yourself like flush with energy of like excitement and presence, and
mhm,
not the energy signature of stuff that ties back to me, back to the relationship with my mother and like being a baby, like because that
mhm,
comes in a very certain way, and I can smell it, I can taste it, I can feel it, and
mhm,
some of it is a little reactive, and I do still struggle with like pushing that stuff away, but also learning to like be okay with it too. and to like, try to integrate
Yeah.
some of the stuff, express some of the stuff, and do all the things that need to
Yeah.
happen with it.
I think it's important to like not shame those desires, but to be like, it makes sense why you might want that, or why you might have wanted that at some point, or even
Mm-hmm.
why you think you still want that. Like, you want to feel better.
Yeah.
That's okay.
All right.
And it doesn't mean that um, it doesn't mean you can't have that, but
Right.
also it's like if we're going to get that, then how do we um, how do we come at it from like a healed place, as opposed to like, how do I give this part of me what it's needing now, the support and the unconditional love and acceptance and understanding, so that it's not like craving this external thing to like need to be fixed or feel better or whatever. It's
Right.
like, you know,
And I think about that.
attuning to
I
that.
think about that in a lot of different situations, not only with relationships, also with relationships, but it's like entering into things with the idea that like it's going to fix a problem for me, you know?
Yeah, I think it's really human. So
Yeah.
I even find myself doing this and I'm like, oh, it's so tricky.
Yeah.
Because then I'll be like, oh, I did the thing again where it's
Right.
like I'm
Carrot and stick and
making,
sugar
yeah, I'm
mountain, right?
making, yeah, Sugar Mountain. I'm making this external thing. If I get this or I have this, then that'll mean like I win or I'm good or I get these feelings. And I'm like, oh, it's all backwards, right? It's
Right.
like
Tricky, tricky, new level, new devil.
new level, new devil. Yeah, it is really tricky. And like, just to go back to like the coaching thing a little bit, because I got into this big like discussion with a friend of mine, and he was saying like coaching or therapy is superior to coaching, and I'm like, no, it's not. And people will have like different theories, like probably feelings about this, but I feel like they are complementary fields, and they're not the same thing. They're just
Mm-hmm.
not. And while and coaching is still widely unregulated, um, and in therapy it's just kind of like there's really great vetted credentialed therapists, there's really great vetted credentialed coaches.
Mm-hmm.
We're all still fucking human.
Mm-hmm.
There are some really bad therapists that, despite their best efforts, end up
Mm-hmm.
causing further damage. There are lots of coaches that will damage people as well. And nobody's perfect, but I do think that what's most important is that each person in their field strives to um, work in integrity, continue their education, try to
Mm-hmm.
stay up to date on the latest like neuroscience and all of the latest developments that they can, without like flogging themselves to death, but doing their due diligence, and also just making sure that their heart's in it, that like they really want to be in
Mm-hmm.
this field, that they're not just here because it's like about the money. It's like, if it's
Right.
really about the money, then you probably shouldn't be doing this thing, right? Because
I heard
it's
some
really
therapists
important.
argue once that like it was one therapist arguing to another that one of her imperatives is that she had to like her client, to like be on the same side, where her colleague didn't think so, didn't think that was like an important part.
Hmm.
And I think that that's like really like a fundamental thing, right? You have to, you know, the container, right, has to be
Right.
like this like mutual thing, because at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
it's just two people like working together, trying to be creative, and like,
Mm-hmm.
you come with like a plan or an idea and seeing how some of the things work together and like asking another person to participate with you in exploring some of these ideas, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, you reminded me of something like one of the fundamentals of like acting.
Yeah.
So when people are playing like bad guys or villains, it's so important that when you're playing a character that you are on their side, that you like believe them, that you because you're playing that character. I mean, perhaps you could do a thing where there's like self-loathing or whatever, but as an actor, like you need to be on your character's side and like understand their perspective and know where they're coming
Right.
from. Otherwise, it's just like, rejecting like an organ transplant. It like isn't going to work. And it's the same like in coaching relationships as well. It's like it's all about the win-win.
Yeah.
There's like no need to sell somebody on coaching, because if you're having to sell somebody on their own transformation, they're not ready for it.
Right.
If you have to convince someone like tap dance and be like, I'm the right person for you, like then it's
Yeah.
really not a fit, or they're not ready, or just,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. There's a number of factors involved. And I found like really the best relationships are where like they're ready. Okay, they have their doubts, like they might be like scared but excited,
Mm-hmm.
but they're like, yeah, I'm ready to change. Like I feel like you know what you're doing. I feel like I can trust you.
Mm-hmm.
Um and that you like each other, because you're going to be, I work with clients like sometimes like 3 months is really my minimum, and I'll probably be moving to 6 months minimum, because consistency and time are really important contributing factors to results and success. But anywhere from 3 months, like I've had clients for like 2 years, like 2 years at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a long time to be in working relationship. And it's like when you find someone that you work well with, or something clicks in that relationship, and there is like it is the win-win, like I enjoy coaching them, they enjoy working with me,
Mm-hmm.
then it can be a beautiful thing and lots of great transformation. And then
Mm-hmm.
you are developing relationships, and then they're getting incredible results. And like there's nothing better than to be with someone at the beginning of their journey with you, where they didn't believe something was possible, to the end where they're like, I've just met the love of my life, and I've never been in a relationship that feels like this, and I couldn't have done it without you. And it's true, but like they also couldn't have done it without their own commitment to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like what the container, like what happens within that container between a therapist and a client, between a coach and a client, is like magic, is like some form of
Mm-hmm.
alchemy, and
Yeah.
it's really cool. Um, it's really cool. And oftentimes my clients are seeing therapists at the same time they have their therapist, because usually the clients that I work with, I think all of them are like fearful avoidant, or healing through fearful avoidant, at
Right.
least disorganized, but fearful avoidant. So it can take a lot of work, but I've seen amazing things happen. And um, and then a lot of my clients too have just done years and years and years of therapy, and they come to coaching and they've laid this amazing foundation. They have a lot
Right.
of understanding and awareness and insight, and they're literally ready to pop like popcorn.
Right.
And it's just like, it's just
Yeah.
like
All right.
helping
Here we
them make
go.
these little shifts and like see these little things, and then suddenly everything is just like starting to make sense, and they understand why,
Right.
and they know all the things, and then they're able to like create some really fast transformation. So it's really cool to watch.
I was reminded recently. I was talking to a friend about getting into therapy. Right. She had been
Hmm.
struggling, for probably like the last year. You know, her life is, but she's very, we'll say, stubborn. She's just a stubborn type of person.
Mm.
So I happened to run into her the other day, and I was like, "So did you reach out?" And she's like, "No." And one of the things she said to me is that she said, "It's so hard to. How would I ever trust somebody?" And I was like, "Oh." I was almost got excited for her because I was like, "That's wonderful," because that's exactly the place where you could begin to do that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I was trying to, you know, give her a very light-hearted, not so, like trying to encourage somebody and not be pushy about it.
Right.
Of just like telling some of my own stories about, you know, in those places about some of the magic, like the basic trust of a person, because that's like 101 of like really working with anybody in a
Mm.
helping role is about safety. and about respect and about listening, and just
Mhm.
how those basics can really be so goddamn healing, And then,
Yeah.
like you said, if the energy starts to move, right? If they've like put all these pieces in place and
Mm.
see things from different places, then you can. There's so much energy available for us humans. Like we really can like shoot off like rockets. Some people can. I'm
Yeah.
more like of
Yeah.
a slow prairie fire, but like I've seen it in other people, and just in talking to you and hearing some of your stories, just knowing that that's some people's karma. That's some what happens for some people.
Yeah, they're just ready, and it just it's cool to to like help facilitate and mentor that, and to see them like show up differently. Like the one client that had the younger child, um, I remember I first started coaching her, and she would show up a lot like, sort of stressed, right? And eventually she showed up and she was just like this.
Just beaming.
She was like in a blissed out state. And I was like, this is exactly it. Like, my goal is to coach people into not needing me. And not
Hmm.
to say like they don't, need other people, but to
Right.
really get to a place where they're able to like shift and do. And it's just,
I
it's so
was,
cool.
I
So
think about
cool.
like seeding self, right? And so in all the therapy that
Mhm.
I've done and the work that I've done, that I'm always scratching back little pieces of my own being, right? And when I get little
Mhm.
pieces of my own being back, that I get more powerful as a person,
Yeah.
And so think about like you as like you're like a builder or a coach and like working on the garden, working on the energy, like putting the pieces in place, and then it's like, you know, we did great work. Like now you can take these belong to you. This is you. This is your birthright. This is your being, and you don't
Yeah.
need me to do any of that. Like maybe like I'm glad to be with you and to help grow and to share and to explore and to put pieces of the puzzle together. But the puzzle is yours. And your
Mm.
life is yours. And so, yeah. And so, like
Yeah.
the longest relationship I had in a therapeutic role was like, it was over 4 years, and our work came to like a very, really natural and wonderful conclusion together where we both kind of felt like, all right, we've done what we could do. Like, and we did like
Mhm.
a lot of wonderful work that I'm super grateful for, and I still have plenty of work to do wonderfully, but that like that we built a fire and I was given a torch, and then like now it's my job to carry it on into the future and do what I can do with my own light that I was able to recover.
Mm.
Yeah.
So beautiful, Nick. I love that. No, and I love I coach a lot of like therapists and entrepreneurs and practitioners, and one of my favorite things to see is like the ripple effects of how they're able to serve more people like with their light as
Mm-hmm.
it grows and their energy,
Mm-hmm.
and just seeing like those ripple effects in the world. It's really amazing. It's really humbling, and um it's just so cool.
Agreed.
Um yeah, I don't know if you wanted to discuss anything else, or maybe talk about like your own experience with like the difference between coaching and therapy for you, if you're able to make that distinction. I mean, I have my
In
own
my
experience.
in mine, it's a little. I feel like it's almost a little muddier because of maybe I was thinking maybe now that I'm like a decent candidate for coaching. Like I'm not really doing anything right now. I'm kind of
Yeah.
cruising along,
Hmm.
Uh, I think about all the work that I did with my coach, who was a therapist, which I don't really get what we did. It was coaching because he was in another state. He was a coach. He was like,
Well, it was, yeah, but what you were doing was like therapy model. Yeah.
Uh, yes,
Because
yes,
it was more based in, yeah, yes. I mean, these things are kind of,
yeah.
I think, more gray area than they are black and white to some degree, but
Yeah,
there are definitely, yeah.
and so my personal experience with all the different people. So I probably worked with like 20 separate individuals in my life. Most of those when I was younger though, going from like therapist to therapist, and that's one of the things I could say is about like having to be like on the same page. There has to be some kind of basic rapport, because for so
Mhm.
many people I had no rapport, and there was not any kind of like real relationship. So there wasn't like a
Mm,
bubble that was actually began. There was a couple of people, but it was just the circumstances of my life. It didn't work out that I didn't work with those people for very long, and so it
mhm,
takes me being like it takes my being sort of like baking or breaking down or maturing or sort of essentially getting so fed up that it made me more brave, right?
mm,
Because like I had my hand on the stove for so long, right? That when somebody decided to show up and say like, okay, we're gonna look in a different direction, I'll be like, let's fucking do it because I'm ready, you know.
mhm.
Um, but basic distinctions, I've like struggled with some of the ideas because mostly because I see so much just in the container of what like a helping relationship does, which is just like essentially the active listening and the mirror neuroning effect, that happens,
Mhm.
uh, and I guess that like I'm not necessarily in a place where I would consider like that and I need therapy. It's like I am functioning to some kind of level, it's like I get up every day, I do my job, like I try to be creative, and like my energy is at a certain place. I would love for my energy to go on some rockets. There's a couple of uh, whatever, there's still plenty of work to be done, so
Yeah,
I don't think that I have a distinct, because I think that there's so much overlap, but
yeah,
that's just my opinion.
yeah. I was trying to think about how I would define like the difference and how it feels, and I would say, so I've had some therapists that I thought weren't as great, but I've had some like really good therapists.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that what I thought those therapists were really good at was being observant and noticing, like noticing me and like little tiny behaviors.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I'm so two of like my favorite therapists. Um, one of them, I remember sitting in her presence and feeling really, really small, like really tiny. And that was when I knew that I was tapping into some like vulnerability and allowing myself to be seen. There was like probably some child part that was showing up and allowing myself to be seen.
Yeah.
And that was really new for me. And I could, like, she was very good at like reflecting back to me and encouraging me. And like, I just felt very safe with her in order, like, exploring some of these emotions and things. And then this other one I had, I went through like a rough time with a breakup one time and I knew I needed some extra support. So I went in and I had actually, some of my like my fearful stuff was coming up because I had a roommate at the time and we had like gotten into like a little argument or something. We were disagreeing about something and he was very tall and he raised his voice at me and it triggered me so badly. And we were like probably 4 feet apart. So he was like kind of close to me. And it must have just triggered my like dad stuff where I was like, holy shit, I'm terrified that I'm gonna be obliterated. Like I just had no idea what I thought was gonna happen. And I like hid from him for like a good week. I was like in and out of the apartment. I like wasn't coming out of my room. Like I was trying to like sneak around because that's how like scared I was. And I remember I was talking to his therapist about it, and she was like, slow down. And she was like, repeat that again. She would have me say things over, like slowly. And it was because I was speeding through certain things to not feel the emotion of it.
Mm.
And so it was like she was able to like help me slow down and like drop into it. And what I realized was there was so much fear and panic and anxiety. And she said, what do you think is going to happen? And I remember just like breaking down and saying, I don't know. But I was so, so scared.
Right.
And what she helped me to understand is that even though I was afraid of like not knowing what would happen, that I could come up with a plan and do things and actually like have a conversation and it be safe. And, so I ended up being able to have that conversation and feel safe and protected and having my own strategies and stuff. And so I've implemented those kind of things in my life. And so I view both of them as like incredibly brilliant. I wish I had been able to work with both of them for longer. I actually worked with both of them just for like a few months at a time. But yeah, and then I've also had some terrible coaches, but I've had really good coaches too. And also, some of the really good coaches were also really good at listening to me and at
Mm-hmm.
seeing me and reflecting things back to me and making me feel incredibly safe in expressing my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I will say some of the things I had done differently in coaching might have been more like practical, like skills in what to do for scheduling or what to do with routines, like I felt like there was some more tangible kind of,
Mm-hmm.
yes, in a way, goal or like results oriented, like a lot more of like, how will we measure this? Like I feel like there can be a bit more measurement in coaching. And even though touching on past things, it's like, I think spending perhaps less time in the past, maybe more time in the present, and like making sense of the past so you can transmute it in the present to create a future you want instead,
Mm-hmm.
I will say. Um, so yeah, but a lot of the coaches that I've worked with have done what I've done, which is like cross training in a lot of different modalities.
Mm-hmm.
So like I I am always training and studying. Like a lot of my mentors are all therapists. Um, and I do continuing education credits with like the NICABM, the National Institute of Cognitive and Behavioral Medicine, because I want to be able to support people, not like I'm never going to take the place of a therapist. I really do feel like it's like different work to some degree, and therapists are definitely trained differently. But just because everything is really at its basis like so very emotional, it's like what we're really doing is working with the emotional landscape. And the reasons why we don't move forward in life is our emotional reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is all really about energy. And it's like how coaches work with energy is different than how therapists work with energy sometimes. But then again, like I've said, there's so much overlap now that I think there's a lot of commonalities. Um, but then if you're getting into like psychiatry and like um,
Pharmacology.
uh, pharmacology, that's like a different animal too, because
Right.
there's a lot of different things. So anyway, the only other thing I thought to say, and I forgot to say it, that I'll just say now, is that the idea of like wherever you go, there you are. So what can be a really sneaky thing when you're entering into coaching or therapy is the fact that we will likely end up recreating our patterns in relationship within therapeutic relationships as well, or within coaching relationships.
Absolutely.
And I had a consult with someone recently, and it's like her longest relationship had been like 2 weeks, but she had also started to replicate, or was replicating these patterns with therapists, where it was like
Mm-hmm.
the longest she had been with a therapist was like a couple weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And then it was starting to like break those patterns, and then the thoughts she had about those patterns. But so it can be very interesting to navigate the journey of unconsciousness or lack of awareness into awareness, even as you hire practitioners. Like, it is likely that you will find people that are, or resonate with people that may be like unhealed, or may re-injure you in ways that you have already been injured because of your own stuff. Wherever you go, there you are, right?
I think about it because I ran into it in that relationship of 4 years, right? After a
Yeah.
few sessions, he happened to ask me, "Well, what do you think about me?" And in my head, I was like getting ready to fire him,
Mm-hmm.
just because I had like a laundry list of things. And
Mm-hmm.
I figured out that I am hyper vigilant for any types of slights to like my what I perceive like people perceive me as or something. Like I get very sensitive. So it's like he's 5 minutes late. Well, it's like, well, he definitely doesn't give a fuck about me.
Oh, so it's like making meaning based on what, like how someone's acting, then you would definitely extrapolate, like you would make it about you
Yes,
as a
absolutely,
site.
and
Okay.
and in a highly ultra sensitive way. Okay, which is a recreation of my relationships as well, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
and I think that like that I've seen it also in other people. But so I worked with him. He encouraged me to tell him what I was thinking about him, and I didn't want to do it, but I did do it, and it was pretty amazing, right? Like that simple thing, because that was really scary to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I also realized that like because I worked with a few other people, and I realized that in therapeutic and in coaching relationships that I do that with almost everybody, right? So like there will be some
Mm-hmm.
sort of like Rubicon. It's just like an energetic boundary that I have to go through, which is I will begin to either feel it'll be some sort of counter-dependent thing like no, this is wrong, this person doesn't care about me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, usually that's the crux of it,
Yeah. They don't give
and
a shit about me. You're
they don't
full
give a
of
shit about
shit.
me. And when that happens, when that comes up, it's a whole trigger and it's a whole thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, in the past, I would have just taken that as like, oh, this is just a sign of like, this just is what it is, right? This person
Right.
doesn't
It's
give a shit
this
about me.
person. Like, yeah, it's this person. Like, it doesn't have to do with me. It just, this, here's another person that just doesn't give a shit. Right.
Exactly, right.
Yet another person.
Yeah, and I've seen that in some of my friends who, delved into therapeutic relationships where it lasted like a few months and then they quit. I'd be like, what's going on? And it was just like, oh, no, I can almost sniff it out now of like, the
Right.
reasons that they give. And I was like, oh, okay. I, I can
Right. The
intuitively sense what
story.
happened was that you got triggered and then you pushed them away, which is
Mm-hmm.
totally normal. It's absolutely normal. But it can be so it can feel so deep and so just like real that you won't
Mm-hmm.
even begin to think that like this is a mechanism in your own being to keep you safe, which would be beneficial to explore past those boundaries.
Right. Yeah, because that part of the like avoidant personality is very sneaky and very good at convincing. It's
Oh
very
yeah,
good at it. It's like
absolutely.
throwing your shit in someone else's yard and being like, ew,
Yeah,
ew, look at that, all that shit in their yard.
yeah,
And it's
and
like,
and
it's
there's
so
shit in the
good.
yard now. It's just there. Everybody, you can see it, can't you? I mean, it's just like
Right.
it's so matter of fact. It's so black and white that it just makes sense.
Right.
To like, well, I don't play around in yards with full of shit,
Which
so
shit.
I mean, look, throwing my
Yeah.
hands up. I'm out of here.
Exactly. It's like, oh, that's disgusting. But it's like, meanwhile, you were the one that like lobbed all that shit over there. It's just like classic projection. But it's just, it's so
Classic
very clever.
projection, but it's so sneaky
So thinking, so clever.
It's actually a little, to me it's a little heartbreaking to like think about my friend who I know that happened to, because what I intuited was kind of a little bit of a folding in, a protective mechanism that pushed
Yeah.
the help away, pushed the growth away, and went back to where they were. And I was like, yeah. I mean, I totally get it, absolutely get it, but
Right. Yeah.
want for them to
Yeah.
see past
And
that.
we talked about this, I think, on another podcast as well, but just like kind of the mystery of awakening and how it
Right.
happens is like so,
Yeah.
it's like timing and like the nervous system and the circumstances and like the pressure. It's like creating a diamond or something, but it's just like compressing
The
all of
ebb and the
this.
flow of like where it
Yeah.
comes, like the perspectives that you'll get and then lose, like, it's the,
Yeah.
you know, just the learning, learning like never ends. Like perspective never ends. Like growing sort of never ends. You can just continue to go on up into the future forever.
Yes, yes. Sorry, I had someone call me.
You bastard.
Someone called me on my phone. Um, yeah. Well, this was
This is nice.
a good
I
one, I
know what
think.
we're going to call it.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. Anyway,
And that will be on the title, and there will be words under the title.
okay.
It'll happen.
Are you happy with our conversation?
I am. I'm very happy. I hope you all listening enjoyed it. Leave a comment, subscribe. All those things really help. I'd love to hear your comments and your feedback. Maybe you agree with us, maybe you don't agree with us on certain things. It's good to know what you would like to hear about. If there's things that were helpful or you had aha moments, also love to hear about those. And yeah, so until next time, thanks for listening to the So Emotional podcast. We'll see you real soon.
Bye.
Bye.